So let's take a look at the beginning of Book 10. May I know you who know me. May I know as also I am known. Power of my soul, enter into it and fit it for yourself, so that you may have and hold it without spot or blemish. This is my hope. That is why I speak. In this hope I am placing my delight, when my delight is in what it ought to be. This is a theme I'll come back to next time when I want to talk about Augustine on happiness. My joy needs to be where it ought to be. Happiness consists in part of having my joy be where it needs to be. Next time we'll investigate where, in his view, that needs to be. But for now, I want to think about that question. It's something that C.S. Lewis picks up on as a major theme in Augustine. It is ordo amoris, the order of loves. His idea is that we must be attuned to the things that really matter. It's not just a question of thinking the right things, having the right beliefs. We need to care about the right things. We need to value the right kinds of things. And so here, it's not just a subjective question. It's not just a matter of, hey, what do you value? Oh, well, I like this, I don't like that, and so on. It's not like that. There are certain things that ought to be desired, that ought to be liked. There are other things that should not be desired, that should not be liked. And so there is a kind of order of loves, an order of our affections, a feeling that I have maybe apt or inapt. It might be something that is appropriate for that object on that occasion, or it might not be. And so it's very important that we attune our desires, our emotions, to the nature of things themselves. In Plato, desire and emotion are two of the three parts of the soul, but they're viewed as, well, to a large extent, independent. The idea is supposed to be that emotion is usually allied with reason, maybe even always allied, but that desire is unruly and going off in its own direction. Well, sometimes it does. But Augustine's point is that in the well-ordered soul, desire and emotion are directed toward the things they ought to be directed toward. Some things should be. They are worthy of being desired. Some things are worthy of being admired. Some things are worthy of being disgusted by, or were worthy of being shunned. And so we have to understand that these are objective features of the world. We need to adapt our own emotional reactions and our own desires to those conditions, those features of the world. There is an order of our loves, of our desires, of our emotions, and we are to feel those emotions when we ought to feel them. There are things, let's take anger as an example of an emotion. We should sometimes be angry. And so Aristotle will say, well, yes, it's a question of being angry at the right time, to the right extent, for the right reason, toward the right object, and so on and so forth. Augustine would put it slightly differently. There are things that deserve anger. There are things we ought to be angry about. And so what's really primary here is not thinking about the mean between extremes, but what are we doing when practical wisdom directs us toward that mean? We're responding to something in the world. There's something objective that we're saying that is worthy of being angry about. That's something that deserves my anger. Other times it's admiration. Some things deserve my admiration. Other things don't. And so I have to attune my own emotional responses and my own desires to what really makes them fitting, makes them appropriate, to what deserves those reactions in the world. There are things that are worthy of praise, worthy of condemnation, worthy of desire, worthy of abhorrence, and I should adapt my attitude to that. That is a crucial part of what my goal in life should be, and it will turn out to be a crucial part. There are some great lines in this book of the Confessions. The human race is inquisitive about other people's lives, but negligent to correct their own. Why do they demand to hear from me what I am, when they refuse to hear from you what they are? In general, in other words, not only do we not know ourselves very well, we're largely opaque to ourselves, we don't seem to care all that much. We don't really seem to try to find out much about what we are. And maybe if we did try to understand better what we are, there are some things we could understand. But we'll see. He thinks there's a lot we nevertheless could not possibly understand. Only God can fully understand. Well, he prays, make perfect my imperfections. But now he worries. Do I even know what my imperfections are? Perhaps not. Perhaps what I view as my greatest sins, as the thing that I'm most in need of forgiveness of, God barely notices. But God sees some other log in my eye that I'm completely unaware of. So he says, you, Lord, are my judge. For even if no man knows the being of man except the spirit of man which is in him, yet there is something of the human person which is unknown even to the spirit of man which is within him. But you, Lord, know everything about the human person, for you made humanity. Though in your sight I despise myself and estimate myself to be dust and ashes, I nevertheless know something of you which I do not know about myself. Without question we see now through a mirror in an enigma, not yet face to face. For this cause, as long as I'm a traveler absent from you, I'm more present to myself than to you. Yet I know that you cannot be in any way subject to violence, whereas I don't know which temptations I can resist, and which I cannot. This is an interesting twist on what Paul said in Romans. Paul said, I don't understand what I do. I constantly do the thing I hate, and I fail to do the thing that I want to do. How is this possible? He says, it's as if sin is an outside force dwelling within me. It's not I who sin, it's sin dwelling within me. He can't understand what this is. And Augustine here is taking it one step further, saying, I don't even know what temptations I can resist and which ones I can't. I'd like to be in a position of saying, lead me not into temptation, and following the advice to avoid temptation. But how do I know what temptations I need to avoid and which temptations I can resist? I have no way of knowing that. I don't know until I'm in the fire, as it were, whether I can resist that temptation or not. I don't know until I'm faced with it, whether it's something that I'm going to be strong-willed about or I'm going to be weak-willed about. So there is a broad view here of strength of will and weakness of will that I think is really interesting. We'd like to think of people, as Aristotle does maybe, as being arranged on a sort of spectrum from vicious, seeking the bad because it's bad, to the virtuous, seeking the good because it's good, and not even feeling temptation. But then, less good than that, the person who is strong-willed, who feels the temptation but resists, the person who is weak-willed, the person who feels the temptation and gives into it. Of course, this is something like a spectrum. There are all sorts of degrees of this. But now Augustine says, well, it's not just a question of not knowing what degree I am, whether I'm here or here on the strength of will scale. It's also really a multidimensional scale. There may be certain things I'm very good at resisting, other things I'm hopeless at resisting. Am I going to be able to resist that temptation on that occasion? I have no idea. I can't tell. Knowing that I'm relatively high on the scale is not going to protect me. That might be a unique vulnerability. On the other hand, knowing I'm weak-willed doesn't mean I won't be able to resist that temptation. Maybe I will. Maybe I will find a strength of will there. And so that is something about myself I can't understand. How strong-willed am I? How weak-willed am I? I don't know. Now, I think there's an interesting and deep and somewhat disturbing question here that emerges more and more as we go along. There are people we remember as great people because of one heroic thing they did. But now, were they in general heroic people? Were they able to overcome the temptation to, let's say, look out for their own safety first in all other situations? Maybe. Maybe it never came up. Maybe they weren't. Maybe in this one instance they managed to do it. There are other people who are remembered for the one horrible thing they did. It might be that in general they were strong-willed. They gave in that one time. But it's one time that really mattered. And so there is a certain level of not only our memory of ourselves, but our memory of other people that depends on key situations when we're put to the test. And the scary thing here is, and hence the prayer, do not put us to the test. We don't know how we're going to behave when we're put to the test. We can try to strengthen our wills, but will we be strong when we're actually put to that test? When you're put to the test, morally speaking, you're going to be able to resist and pass that test, or will you give in to temptation? No way to tell. And so Augustine really is worried here, not only that he doesn't know the extent to which he'll be able to resist temptation in any given situation. He realizes, I don't know whether in the end I'm going to be viewed as an admirable person or a despicable person because I don't know, in the situations that really matter when I'm put to the test, how I'll do. And that's a very frightening thought. It's a way of saying there are all sorts of disorderings of my emotions, of my desires, of my thoughts, of all of those things. And since I don't know to what extent my own desires and emotions and thoughts are properly ordered, I don't know how well I'm doing. He says, undoubtedly, I sin unawares. I am, no doubt, sometimes sinning and knowing that, but often sinning and having no idea that I'm doing it. Just as it says in one beautiful biblical verse, there are times when we entertain angels unawares. So similarly, we sin unawares. We may be committing our most wonderful acts and our most despicable acts. We may be committing our most wonderful actions and our most deplorable actions without even being aware that we're doing it.